On a late-night bus, I found a legal file to strip away my assets secretly filed by my own daughter. At dinner, right after she pushed a hot bowl of soup toward me and said gently, "This soup is great for your brain, Dad. You've been so forgetful lately." My heart sank as the cruel plot became clear. Instead of exposing her, I swallowed my bitterness, secretly gathered toxicity evidence, and partnered with unexpected allies, determined to orchestrate a counter-strike to dismantle her scheme. Thank you so much for standing by, Revenge Dad. Your support means everything. Let me know, down below, which city or country are you watching this from? Quick note. This narrative blends some creative details for dramatic and educational purposes. Any similarities to real settings are coincidental, but the protective message is entirely essential. The number 23 bus left the Allegheny Avenue stop at exactly 10:14 on a Tuesday night, and I was the only passenger who had chosen the very last row. That was intentional. After 70 years of living in Philadelphia, I had learned that the back of a bus was the one place in this city where nobody expected anything from you. No conversation, no eye contact, no performance of being fine when you were not entirely sure that you were. I pressed my shoulder against the cold window and watched the streetlights of Kensington slide past in long orange streaks one after another. Like the pages of a book I had read so many times, I no longer needed to look directly at the words to know what they said. I was on my way to Charlotte's apartment for dinner. My daughter lived 11 blocks north of my house, close enough that I could have walked. But the October air had turned sharp in the last 2 days, carrying that particular Philadelphia cold that does not announce itself so much as arrive without warning and settle into your bones like it owns the place. My left knee had been giving me trouble since September. The bus made more sense. I had a bottle of hot sauce in my jacket pocket. Charlotte always forgot to buy it, and I liked it on everything she cooked, a habit her mother had called embarrassing, and I had called non-negotiable for 43 years of marriage. Eleanor had been gone for 6 years now. I still bought the hot sauce. Some habits are not about the person they started with. They are about who you decided to be. I was thinking about Eleanor when the woman boarded at the Kensington and Allegheny stop. She stepped onto the bus the way people do at the end of a shift, that has already taken everything they had and then asked for a little more, one hand on the rail, the other pressing a canvas tote bag against her hip eyes, already half closed before she had finished climbing the steps. She was young, mid-20s at most, wearing scrubs the color of a winter sky, pale blue gone dull under fluorescent light, with a darker stain near the left cuff that I recognized from the years Eleanor spent volunteering at Jefferson Hospital. That particular shade of exhaustion did not come from a desk job. She dropped into a seat 4 rows ahead of me, without looking back, without checking who else was on the bus, without any of the small urban calculations that people usually run when they sit down in a public space at night. The canvas bag landed beside her on the seat, the zipper open halfway, the flap hanging loose. Within 90 seconds of sitting down, her chin had dropped toward her chest, and her breathing had slowed to the long, even rhythm of someone who had stopped fighting sleep and simply surrendered to it. I looked back out the window. The bus moved north through streets I had known for 50 years. I grew up 12 blocks from this route, delivered newspapers on half these corners, as a teenager, learned to drive in the parking lot of the ShopRite, that was now a check-cashing place with steel mesh on the windows. Philadelphia had changed around me, the way rivers change, always moving, always the same river, just carrying different things downstream. I was thinking about the hot sauce and whether Charlotte had remembered to pick up the bread I liked when the bus driver hit the brakes. Not a slow stop, not a rolling deceleration, a full sudden hard stop that threw me forward against the seat back in front of me and sent the half-empty coffee cup 2 rows up, skidding across the floor. Somewhere outside, a car horn laid on long and angry. The driver said something under his breath that I did not catch, and then I heard it, the soft, papery sound of something sliding. The canvas bag had toppled sideways. A thick folder, the color of a lemon rind, bright and wrong against the gray floor of the bus, had slipped free of the open zipper and skated the full length of the aisle on the slick linoleum, coming to rest against the toe of my left shoe with a soft, definitive stop. I looked up. The young woman in the scrubs had not moved. Her head had jerked forward with the stop and then settled back. She was still asleep. I leaned down and picked up the folder. It was heavier than it looked, dense with paper, the kind of folder that held real documents rather than copies, original signatures, original stamps, original intent. I turned it over to check the front cover, meaning only to read whatever was written there, so I could return it correctly. So I could say to her when she woke up here, "This fell, it says, your name on the front." But the name on the front was not hers. It was mine, Arthur Pendleton, printed in clean block letters beneath a heading that I read 3 times before the words stopped rearranging themselves into something that made more sense than what they actually said. Petition for involuntary psychiatric conservatorship. Subject Arthur Pendleton. Petitioner Charlotte Pendleton. The floor of the bus felt very far away. My left hand tightened around the seat back. My right hand held the folder and did not let go. I am a geologist. I spent 40 years reading rock formations, identifying fault lines, understanding pressure, where it was building, where it was likely to give. I know what it feels like when the ground beneath you is not as solid as it looks. I know the particular quality of stillness that comes just before something shifts. I sat very still in the last row of the number 23 bus and felt the ground shift. I opened the cover. The first page was a cover sheet. Beneath the heading, Petition for Involuntary Psychiatric Conservatorship, Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Court of Common, Pleas. Philadelphia County, my full legal name was printed in a font so clean and official, it looked like it belonged on a government document. Because it did. Someone had filed this. Someone had walked into a courthouse with this folder and handed it to a clerk and paid the filing fee and started a legal process that, if completed, would strip me of the right to make my own decisions about my own life, my own money, my own body. That someone was my daughter. In Pennsylvania, a conservatorship, sometimes called a guardianship of the estate, is a legal arrangement in which a court determines that an individual is no longer mentally capable of managing their own affairs and appoints another person to do it for them. It sounds protective when you read about it in a pamphlet. It sounds like something families do out of love when a parent can no longer remember to pay their electric bill or starts leaving the stove on. It is also, when constructed fraudulently, one of the most effective methods available under American law for one person to take everything another person owns without ever being accused of stealing it. Because the court does it for you. The court signs the order. The court makes it legal. And once that order is signed, the conservator controls the bank accounts, the investment portfolios, the real estate, the retirement funds, all of it, with full legal authority and very limited oversight. $3 million. That was the number on page 4 listed under assets subject to proposed conservatorship. My retirement account. The property on Clearfield Street that Eleanor and I had paid off 17 years ago, and that I had never once considered selling because it was the house where Charlotte took her first steps, and where I had carried Eleanor through the front door after her last round of chemotherapy, and where I still slept in the same bed we had shared for 4 decades. All of it, itemized, valued, ready to be transferred. My hands were not shaking. I noticed that, specifically the absence of shaking, because I expected them to. Instead, they were very still, holding the folder open with the careful, deliberate grip of a man who has learned over a long career that panic is a luxury you cannot afford when the ground is moving beneath you. I turned to page 7. The clinical assessment section required the signatures of licensed medical professionals attesting to the subject's diminished mental capacity. There were 3 signatures on page 7, 3 names, 3 credentials, 3 official stamps from what appeared to be a neurological evaluation clinic on Broad Street. The evaluations were dated 6 weeks ago. According to the documents, I had been assessed by 3 separate physicians who had all concluded independently that I demonstrated significant cognitive impairment consistent with moderate to severe dementia. I had not visited any clinic on Broad Street 6 weeks ago. I had not been evaluated by any physician other than my regular internist, Dr. Hargrove, who had told me at my last physical that my blood pressure was slightly elevated and that I should cut back on red meat, neither of which constituted a diagnosis of dementia. Someone had fabricated these evaluations. Someone had invented the physicians, or stolen their credentials, or forged their signatures on official-looking documents, and then filed those documents with the Court of Common Pleas as evidence that Arthur Pendleton was no longer fit to manage his own life. Tucked inside the back cover, held in place by a single binder clip, were 2 pay stubs. They did not belong with the rest of the folder. They were not legal documents. They were personal, the kind of thing you keep in a drawer or a filing cabinet, not in a medical petition. They were made out to someone named Ebony, a position listed as pharmacy technician from Jefferson University Hospital. The most recent one was dated 3 weeks ago. The amounts were modest, the kind of paycheck that meant every dollar had already been spoken for before it arrived. I understood immediately what they were doing in this folder. Charlotte was holding this woman's income hostage. These pay stubs were proof of employment proof that could be withheld, delayed, or manipulated by someone with enough institutional access to interfere with the payroll system. It was leverage. Crude, simple, effective leverage over someone who could not afford to lose a single paycheck. Sign the clinical assessment. Confirm the diagnosis. Or your next check does not come. I sat with that for a moment. Then I closed the folder very carefully, the way you close something you intend to reopen under better circumstances, and I looked up at the young woman sleeping 4 rows ahead of me. She was maybe 25. The stain on her cuff had dried to a rust color under the bus lights. Her right hand had curled around the strap of her canvas bag, even in sleep, the unconscious grip of someone who had learned that holding on was safer than letting go. She had the kind of exhaustion on her face that did not come from one bad night. It was the accumulated kind, the kind that had been building for long enough that it had stopped feeling like exhaustion and started feeling like a personality. I stood up. I walked 4 rows forward, moving carefully on the swaying bus, and I stopped beside her seat. I did not touch her. I leaned close enough that my voice would reach her without carrying to the front of the bus, and I said, quietly and evenly, the way you speak to someone you do not want to frighten. "Excuse me, miss. I think something fell from your bag." Her eyes opened fast, not the slow drift of someone waking naturally, but the immediate defensive snap of a person whose sleep was always shallow, because the world had taught her that deep sleep was a risk she could not afford. Her right hand tightened on the bag strap before her eyes had fully focused. Then she saw the folder in my hand. Something moved across her face. Not surprise, not relief. Something closer to the particular dread of a person who has been carrying a secret and has just watched it walk toward them with its cover open. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes went from the folder to my face and then back to the folder. "That's mine," she said. Her voice was flat and careful, stripped of everything except the basic claim. "I know," I said. "It fell when the driver braked. I picked it up." She reached out and took it from me with both hands, pulling it against her chest like something she needed to protect, and for just a moment, 1 second, maybe less. Her eyes met mine with an expression I could not immediately name. It was not guilt. It was not fear. It was something more complicated than either of those things, something that looked almost like an apology being swallowed before it could become a word. "Thank you," she said, and the 2 words came out clipped and final, a door closing rather than an opening. She gathered her bag, reached up and pulled the stop request cord in one smooth motion, and walked to the rear doors without looking back at me. The bus slowed, the doors opened. She stepped out into the October night, and the doors closed behind her, and the bus moved on. I stood in the aisle for a moment before walking back to the last row. I sat down. I looked out the window. The streetlights of Kensington moved past one by one, indifferent and unhurried, the way this city had always moved, carrying whoever was on board to wherever they were going, without asking any questions about what they were carrying with them. My daughter had built a legal case to take everything I owned. She had found a young woman exhausted enough and desperate enough that withholding 2 paychecks was sufficient to buy her cooperation. She had forged the signatures of doctors who did not exist on documents filed with a real court under my real name. And she was expecting me for dinner in 20 minutes. I straightened my jacket. I checked that the hot sauce was still in my pocket. I looked out at the passing streets of the city I had lived in for 70 years, and I made a decision so quietly and completely that it did not require a single word, not even inside my own head. It was simply there the way a conclusion is there at the end of 40 years of reading rock, inevitable, precise, and already true before you write it down. I was going to find out exactly how deep this went, and then I was going to take it apart piece by piece the same way I had always worked from the bottom up, starting with what the evidence actually said, and not stopping until I reached the surface. Charlotte's apartment building was a 4-story brick walk-up on Tioga Street, the kind of building that had been constructed in the 1940s, with the expectation that it would last forever, and had spent the last 30 years proving that expectation correct through sheer stubbornness. The front door buzzed when I pressed the intercom. Her voice came through the speaker, warm and immediate, the way it always did, the way it had since she was a little girl, calling down from her bedroom window when she heard my car in the driveway. "And Dad, come on up. I made the soup you like." I stood on the front stoop for exactly 3 seconds before I pushed the door open. 3 seconds to remind myself of what I knew and what I did not yet have proof of. 3 seconds to put the folder, the signatures, the $3 million, all of it somewhere behind my eyes where it would stay quiet, while the rest of my face did what it needed to do. 40 years of fieldwork teaches you to hold two things at once: the map you came in with and the reality you are standing in. They are never exactly the same. The skill is in knowing which one to trust and when. I climbed the stairs. Charlotte opened the door before I could knock. She was wearing a gray cardigan and the pearl earrings her mother had given her on her 30th birthday, and she smiled the smile she had been smiling at me since she was 4 years old, wide and bright and so familiar that for one terrible moment, something in my chest pulled hard toward believing that I had misread the folder, that the name on the cover had been someone else's, that the ground was solid after all. Then she put her hand on my arm and said, "You look tired, Dad. Are you sleeping okay?" And the warmth in her voice had an edge to it, a measuring quality underneath the concern, and the moment passed. "I slept fine," I said. "Bus was slow tonight." Come in, come in. The boys are in the back room. Tyler's been asking about you all week." My grandsons Tyler and Marcus Jr. were 7 and 5, respectively, and they greeted me with the uncomplicated physical enthusiasm of small children who have not yet learned that adults need a moment to decompress before being used as a climbing structure. Tyler grabbed my left hand and pulled. Marcus Jr. wrapped himself around my right leg and held on. I let them drag me toward the back of the apartment, and I laughed the way you laugh, when the laugh is real, even if everything around it is not. Charlotte's apartment smelled of something rich and herb to broth, slow-cooked, the kind of smell that, under any other circumstances, would have made me genuinely glad to be there. She had set the table with the good placemats, the ones with the blue border that had been Eleanor's, and there was bread in a basket and butter in a small dish, and 2 candles lit in the center of the table that cast everything in a light that was designed to feel like home. I sat down. The boys climbed into their chairs. Charlotte moved between the kitchen and the table with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had been managing a household alone since her husband left 4 years ago, and she brought out a pot of soup and ladled it into bowls with a focus that was almost performative in its attentiveness. My bowl arrived first. "Brain health soup," she said, setting it in front of me with a small smile. "Turmeric gingerbone broth. I read an article about it. Very good for cognitive function." She sat across from me and picked up her spoon, and then she looked at me over the steam rising from her bowl with eyes that were doing something her smile was not. "You've seemed a little foggy lately, Dad. Forgetting things. I worry." "I forget where I put my keys sometimes," I said. "I'm 70. That's Tuesday." She laughed. It was a good laugh. She had always had a good laugh even now. "Just eat the soup," she said. "Humor me." I picked up my spoon. I had carried the small sampling vial in the left breast pocket of my field jacket for so long that it had become invisible to me, the way anything becomes invisible when it has been in the same place long enough. I had started carrying it 30 years ago when I was doing core sample work in West Texas, pulling geological specimens from 3,000 feet down and needing a sterile container on hand at all times to preserve whatever the earth offered up. It was a habit I had never stopped, the same way I had never stopped checking the weather before leaving the house or reading the ground before I walked across it. Eleanor had called it a compulsion. I had called it professional discipline. We had agreed to disagree for 4 decades. Tonight it was going to be the most useful thing I owned. I needed Charlotte to look away for long enough to work. It did not need to be more than a few seconds. In field work, a few seconds is all you ever get. I waited. Tyler knocked his cup of juice sideways across the table. Charlotte was up and immediately moving toward the kitchen for a towel, her attention entirely redirected by the orange flood spreading toward the breadbasket. Marcus Jr. began to wail in the sympathetic way of a 5-year-old who cries when something dramatic happens, whether or not it affects him personally. 4 seconds. Maybe 5. I pulled the vial from my pocket. I lifted the napkin from my lap and pressed it against the surface of the soup, soaking through the paper. Quickly, then transferred the liquid carefully into the open vial, sealed it, and returned it to my pocket in a motion so practiced it barely registered as movement. Then I reached across the table and swapped my bowl for the clean one that had been set for Charlotte's second serving, positioning it in front of me, and moving my original bowl to the side with the easy naturalness of a man rearranging the table to help with the cleanup. By the time Charlotte came back with the towel, I was leaning forward with my elbows on the table, talking to Tyler about whether dinosaurs could have lived in Philadelphia, and the soup in front of me was a different bowl than the one she had filled. "Sorry about the mess, Charlie," I said. "Don't apologize, it's fine." She mopped up the juice, resettled Marcus Jr., and sat back down. She looked at my bowl, not at me at the bowl, and something very brief and very controlled moved behind her eyes before her expression reset to warmth. "You haven't touched your soup. Just letting it cool," I said. "You know I can't eat anything hot." I brought the spoon to my lips twice, small sips, enough to confirm there was flavor enough to perform participation. The broth tasted like nothing I could identify as harmful, which meant nothing because the whole point of something designed to be consumed gradually over weeks was that it would not taste like anything except soup. We ate. The boys talked about their school day with the digressive enthusiasm of children who believe every detail is equally important and equally urgent. Charlotte asked about my neighbor Gerald and whether I had called the plumber about the basement and whether I was still walking every morning, the way Dr. Hargrove recommended. I answered everything. I asked about her work. I refilled my water glass twice. At 8:45, I pushed back from the table and said I was feeling a little tired and thought I'd head home early. Charlotte walked me to the door. She kissed me on the cheek, left side, the way she always had since she was small enough that I had to bend all the way down to meet her. Her perfume was the same one she'd worn for years. Everything about her was exactly the same as it had always been, and completely different from what I had believed it to be for the past 43 years. And the distance between those two things was so vast and so cold that I could feel it as a physical sensation, like stepping from a heated room into the open air. "Drive safe, Dad," she said. "I took the bus," I reminded her. She smiled. "Right, of course. Text me when you're home." I walked down the stairs and out onto Tioga Street, and I did not look back at her building. In my left breast pocket, sealed tight in a CLI A-grade collection, vial was a sample of whatever my daughter had been feeding me, with a smile and a story about brain health. By Thursday morning, I would know exactly what was in it. I did not sleep well. That was not unusual for a man of 70. The body develops opinions about sleep somewhere around 65 and begins expressing them loudly and without apology at 3 in the morning. But this was a different kind of wakefulness, not the restless, unfocused kind that comes from too much coffee or an aching knee. This was the kind that comes from a mind that has been given a problem it cannot put down, that keeps turning the same set of facts over and over, the way a stone tumbler works a rough-edge patient and relentless looking for the place where the surface finally gives. I lay in the dark in the bedroom Eleanor and I had shared for 31 years, and I went through it again. The folder, the signatures, the 3 million, the pay stubs tucked inside the back cover like an afterthought that was not an afterthought at all, but a message. This is how we handle people who might cause problems. I thought about Charlotte's eyes moving to my soup bowl when she came back from cleaning up the juice, that half second of assessment that she could not quite keep off her face before the warmth came back. I thought about the way she had said brain health soup with the practiced ease of someone who had rehearsed the line. By 5:45, I gave up on sleep entirely and went to the kitchen and made coffee and sat at the table where Eleanor and I had eaten breakfast for 3 decades. And I wrote down everything I remembered about the folder in the small spiral notebook I kept in the kitchen drawer for grocery lists and phone numbers. Old habit. In geology, you write down what you observe before you interpret it, because interpretation is where human bias enters the process and corrupts the data. Facts first, conclusions after. I had been doing it since graduate school, and I was not going to stop now. I wrote for 40 minutes, then I called the lab. BioVerified Diagnostics occupied the 3rd floor of a medical office building on Chestnut Street and operated under full CLIA certification, the Clinical Laboratory Improvement Amendment standard that the federal government requires of any laboratory whose results are intended to be used in legal or medical proceedings. I had used them twice before, both times during property disputes where soil contamination was a factor, and I needed independent analysis that would hold up under cross-examination. The woman who answered the phone recognized my name. "Mr. Pendleton, it's been a while. What are we looking at today?" "Liquid sample," I said. "Food-based. I need a full toxicological panel, organic compounds, heavy metals, anything that affects neurological function. I need the chain of custody documented from the moment I drop it off." Chain of custody was the critical piece. In any legal proceeding, physical evidence is only as useful as the documentation of how it was handled between collection and analysis. If I was going to use this sample in court, and I was already court had been thinking about it since somewhere around 2 in the morning, the lab needed to log every step. Who received it when, under what conditions, what tests were run, who ran them, what the results showed. Unbroken chain, no gaps. Nothing a defense attorney could point to and call contaminated. "We can have preliminary results in 48 hours, she said. "Full panel in 72. 48 is fine, I said. "I'll be there by 9. I drove to Chestnut Street, dropped the vial, signed the intake paperwork, and was back in my car by 9:20. Then I sat in the parking garage for a few minutes with the engine off and thought about Raymond Holt. Raymond had been my attorney for 12 years. We had met through a mutual acquaintance at a Temple University alumni event. Raymond had graduated from Temple Law in 1991, 3 years after I had finished my own graduate work there in earth sciences, and we had discovered over bad white wine and good conversation that we shared a city, a university, and a similar opinion about the designated hitter rule. He had handled my estate planning, the revision of my will after Eleanor died, the sale of a rental property I had owned in Germantown, and a boundary dispute with my neighbor Gerald that had been resolved without litigation, but not without several long phone calls in which Raymond had demonstrated both legal competence and genuine patience. I trusted him the way you trust someone who has seen your financial life from the inside and handled it with care for over a decade, which was exactly why I needed to call him this morning and why I needed to be very careful about what I said when I did. He picked up on the second ring. "Arthur, good morning. Everything okay?" His voice was the same as it always was, measured pleasant, carrying the particular unhurried quality of a man who had learned that projecting calm was itself a form of professional competence. Raymond Holt was 58 years old, silver-haired, and wore suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent without ever appearing to be trying. He had an office on the 15th floor of a building on Market Street, with a view of City Hall and a receptionist who remembered the names of clients' spouses. "Everything's fine," I said. "I had a question more general than specific. I was reading something last night about conservatorship law in Pennsylvania. Just curious how the process actually works. If someone were to file a petition, what would that look like?" A pause, brief, the kind of pause that in 40 years of professional negotiations I had learned to pay attention to, not long enough to be suspicious on its own, but present enough to register. "Well," Raymond said, and his voice stayed even, "a conservatorship petition in Pennsylvania is filed with the Court of Common Pleas in the relevant county. The petitioner submits documentation of the subject's alleged incapacity, typically clinical evaluations, physician assessments, sometimes affidavits from family members. The court reviews the documentation, and if it finds sufficient evidence of incapacity, it schedules a hearing. At the hearing, the subject has the right to appear and contest the petition. If the court finds in the petitioner's favor, it issues a conservatorship order and appoints the petitioner or another designee as conservator of the estate." He delivered it cleanly, no hesitation on the specifics, no searching for the right terminology, the fluency of someone who had been thinking about this process recently enough that the details were close to the surface. "And the clinical evaluations," I said. "How carefully does the court scrutinize those?" Another pause, marginally longer than the first. "The court relies heavily on the documentation submitted," Raymond said. "Judges in conservatorship cases are not typically medical professionals. They assess credibility of the documentation credentials of the evaluating physicians, format completeness. A well-prepared petition with properly formatted clinical assessments from licensed practitioners is generally given significant weight. A well-prepared petition, properly formatted, given significant weight." He was telling me with the careful deniability of a man who had never quite said anything he could be directly quoted on, exactly how to make a fraudulent petition succeed. And the only reason he would know that with such precision was if he had already helped someone do it. "That's helpful," I said. "Just background, I've been thinking about my own estate planning, whether I should update anything, while I'm still sharp enough to be useful in the conversation." I let a small laugh into my voice, self-deprecating and easy. "You know how it is at 70. "Of course," Raymond said, and the warmth came back into his tone like a light being switched on. "Let's schedule something. I can have Patricia reach out to set up a time." That'd be great, I said. Thanks, Raymond. I ended the call and sat in the parking garage on Chestnut Street and looked at my phone for a long moment. 12 years. Patricia was his receptionist's name, and he had never once needed to say it out loud when talking to me, because I had always called the office directly, and she had always answered, and I had always known exactly who she was. He had just reminded himself of her name, in the middle of a phone call with a client he had known for 12 years. That was not the behavior of a man with a clear conscience. I started the car. I had 48 hours until the lab results came back. I was going to use every one of them. The phone rang at 7:23 on Thursday morning. I was already awake. I had been awake since 5, sitting at the kitchen table with the second pot of coffee I had no business drinking, and the spiral notebook open in front of me, adding to the list of facts I had started 2 mornings ago. The list had grown. I had pulled 12 months of bank statements from the filing cabinet in the study. The physical copies I kept in manila folders organized by quarter, a habit Eleanor had called paranoid, and I had called prudent, and which had now proven itself prudent in a way that neither of us had anticipated. I had gone through them line by line with a yellow highlighter, the way I used to go through core sample data looking for anomalies, and I had found 3. 3 transfers each between $800 and $1,200 each on the 15th of the month, each going to an account number I did not recognize. They had started 11 months ago. They were small enough individually that they had not triggered any alerts from my bank, had not stood out in any single month statement as something requiring attention. Spread across a year, they added up to just over $11,000. Not a dramatic number, not the kind of number that makes a man pick up the phone and call his attorney. Unless his attorney was the one receiving them. I did not know that yet. I was building toward it the way you build toward a conclusion in geology, one layer at a time, each one resting on the one below, nothing assumed, everything verified. But the shape of it was becoming visible the way a formation becomes visible when you have enough core samples to map the subsurface. You cannot see the thing directly, you see what it does to everything around it. The phone rang and I looked at the screen, and it said Bio-Verified Diagnostics, and I set down my coffee cup and answered it. Mr. Pendleton, this is Dr. Sandra Okafor at Bio-Verify. I'm calling with your preliminary panel results. Her voice was professional and measured the voice of a scientist who had learned to deliver findings without editorializing them, to present data and let the data speak. I want to make sure you're somewhere private before I go through these with you. I'm at home, I said. Go ahead. The liquid sample you submitted tested positive for the presence of a compound in the phenylcyclohexylamine family. She paused, and in the pause I heard her choosing her next words carefully. Specifically, a derivative compound that functions as a low-grade neurotoxic agent. At the concentration present in your sample, acute effects would be minimal. You would not experience immediate symptoms from a single exposure. But repeated exposure, I said, repeated exposure over a period of weeks to months, she said, would produce cumulative neurological effects, specifically disruption of acetylcholine production and short-term memory consolidation. The presenting symptoms would include intermittent confusion difficulty with word retrieval, short-term memory gaps, and in some cases, mood instability. Another pause. Mr. Pendleton, those symptoms are clinically indistinguishable from the early to moderate stages of Alzheimer's disease. Without a specific toxicological screen, a physician conducting a standard cognitive assessment would have no reason to suspect chemical causation. I heard what she was telling me. Someone had engineered a situation in which a physician, a real one, not a forged signature, a real doctor conducting a real assessment, would examine me and conclude in good faith that I was developing dementia. The forged signatures in Charlotte's folder were the backup plan, or perhaps the foundation. The soup was the mechanism. Feed me the compound long enough, have me evaluated by a legitimate physician who would see legitimate symptoms, and the conservatorship petition would not require forged doctors at all. It would have real ones. The folder I had found on the bus was not the whole plan. It was the accelerated version, Charlotte moving faster than the original timeline, perhaps because she needed the money sooner than anticipated, perhaps because she had grown impatient, perhaps because of something I did not yet know. The soup was the slower, cleaner version. The folder was the shortcut. They had both been running simultaneously. Dr. Okafor, I said, and my voice came out steady, which surprised me because something in my chest had tightened to the point where breathing required a conscious effort. What is the chain of custody status on this sample? Complete and documented, she said. Intake log handling, log testing log, result certification. Everything is time-stamped and signed. This result would be admissible as evidence in any Pennsylvania court proceeding. I need the full written report, I said. Both the preliminary and the complete panel when it's ready. We'll have the complete panel by tomorrow morning. I'll have both sent to you by secure document transfer. A brief pause, and then she said something that told me she had been doing this long enough to recognize what she was looking at. Mr. Pendleton, are you safe where you are? The question landed differently than I expected. Not because it frightened me, because it was the first time since Tuesday night that anyone had asked about me, rather than about what I knew or what I could prove. I felt something move in my throat that I did not allow to become anything more than a clearing of breath. Yes, I said. I'm safe. Thank you for calling personally. I set the phone down on the kitchen table next to the coffee cup and the spiral notebook and the 12 months of bank statements with their yellow highlighted anomalies, and I sat with what I now knew. My daughter had been poisoning me. Not quickly, not dramatically, with the patience of someone who understood that the most effective way to take something from a person was to first make the person appear to be someone who could no longer be trusted to hold on to it. She had not been trying to hurt me. She had been trying to make me disappear, not from the world, but from the legal category of competent adult, the category that entitled me to own things and make decisions and say no. She had been doing it for almost a year. I thought about Eleanor. I thought about the house on Clearfield Street where we had raised 2 children and repainted the kitchen 4 times because Eleanor could never quite settle on the right shade of yellow. I thought about Charlotte at 8 years old, sitting on the back steps eating a popsicle and telling me with complete seriousness that she was going to be a lawyer when she grew up, because lawyers got to argue, and she was already very good at arguing. I had laughed. Eleanor had laughed. Charlotte had looked at us with the focused dignity of a child who did not appreciate being laughed at and went back to her popsicle. I thought about Daniel. Daniel was in Vancouver, had been for 10 years working in commercial real estate, calling on birthdays and major holidays, and occasionally for long conversations about nothing in particular that I had always valued more than I knew how to say. Daniel, who was 48 years old and steady and careful, and whom I had never once had a reason to doubt. I pulled the thought back before it went further. One layer at a time, facts before conclusions. I had what I needed, a lab result that would hold up in court, a phone record of a conversation with my attorney that had told me more than he intended. 12 months of bank statements with 3 anomalies per month, adding up to $11,000 I could not account for. It was not enough yet, but it was enough to move. I opened the spiral notebook to a fresh page, and I wrote 2 columns the way I had written columns for 40 years, when the data was telling me something I needed to understand before I could act on it. On the left side, I wrote what I know. On the right side, I wrote what I need to prove. The right column was longer, but for the first time since Tuesday night, the left column had something in it that was not just suspicion or memory or the particular ache of a father who has looked at his daughter's face and seen a stranger looking back. It had evidence, and evidence in my experience was where everything real began. The complete lab report arrived by secure document transfer at 8:14. Friday morning, 41 pages of technical analysis that confirmed everything Dr. Okafor had told me on the phone and added 17 additional data points that a defense attorney was going to have a very difficult time arguing against in front of a jury. I printed all 41 pages, hole-punched them, and put them in a binder I labeled medical evidence on the spine in block letters with a black marker, the same way I had labeled field binders for 4 decades. Then I put the binder in the fireproof safe in the study closet next to Eleanor's jewelry, and the deed to the house on Clearfield Street, and my own original will. Then I made a phone call I had not made in 6 years. The number was still in my contacts under Webb Marcus. I had never deleted it, the same way I had never deleted the numbers of the 3 other men who had been in the Hargrove mining survey team with me in the autumn of 1987, when a limestone cavern collapse in the Appalachian foothills of southwestern Pennsylvania had buried 4 of us under 12 feet of unstable rock and sediment for 19 hours while the surface crew worked to reach us. 2 of those 3 other numbers belonged to men who had since died, one of a heart attack in 2019, one in a car accident the following year. The third belonged to Marcus Webb, who answered on the fourth ring with the particular wariness of a man who does not recognize a number but picks up anyway, because ignoring calls is a young person's luxury. "Yeah. Marcus, it's Arthur Pendleton." A beat of silence that was not quite silence. I could hear him breathing, could hear the background noise of what sounded like an air compressor and a radio playing something with a lot of guitar. Then he said, "Well, I'll be damned." And something in his voice opened up the way a room opens up when someone turns on a light, sudden and complete. "Arthur Pendleton, it's been 6 years. 5.5, I said. "Eleanor's funeral. If 5.5. The air compressor cut out in the background. The guitar kept playing. "How are you holding up? I always meant to call more after that. Never did. You know how it is." "I know how it is," I said. "Marcus, I need to see you. Today if possible. In person." A pause of a different quality than the first one. Not surprised this time. Attention. Marcus Webb had spent 30 years reading geological formations and another 20 running a one-man auto repair shop in South Philadelphia. And both professions had given him the same fundamental skill, the ability to tell the difference between a request that was what it appeared to be and one that was carrying something heavier underneath it. "That's serious?" he said. "Yes. Come at 2, he said. "I'll be here." Webb Auto Repair occupied a narrow 2-bay garage on Morris Street in South Philadelphia, wedged between a Vietnamese sandwich shop and a laundromat that had been there since 1974, according to the faded lettering above its door. The garage had a hand-painted sign, the kind made with stencils and exterior paint, and the parking in front was occupied by a Ford pickup with its hood up and a Nissan Sentra with a piece of cardboard tucked under the windshield wiper that said, "Waiting on parts" in Marcus's handwriting, which I recognized because it had not changed since he used to label his core sample bags in the field with the same thick, deliberate print. He came out of the far bay wiping his hands on a shop rag when he heard my car, and for a moment, I just looked at him through the windshield before I got out. Marcus Webb was 65 years old and built the way men are built when they have spent their lives doing physical work. Not large exactly, but dense, the kind of solid that comes from decades of use rather than hours in a gym. His hair had gone fully silver since I had last seen him, and he had grown a beard since then, close-cropped and neat, and he was wearing a navy work shirt with his name stitched above the breast pocket in red thread, the kind of shirt that costs $14 and lasts 10 years if you wash it right. He shook my hand with a grip that had not softened with age, and he looked at my face with the direct assessing gaze of a man who was already doing the calculation I needed him to do. "You look like you haven't slept," he said. "I slept Thursday," I said. "Come inside." He had a small office at the back of the garage separated from the bays by a half wall of painted cinder block with a metal desk and 2 chairs that had clearly been rescued from somewhere else's discard pile and a coffee maker that was older than most of the cars he worked on. He poured 2 cups without asking and set one in front of me and sat across the desk and looked at me with the expression of a man who had learned in 19 hours under 12 feet of rock that the most useful thing you could do in a bad situation was stay very still and listen very carefully. "Tell me," he said. So I told him. Not everything, not yet. I told him about the folder on the bus, about the conservatorship petition, about the lab results. I told him about Charlotte and the soup and the $3 million and the forged physician's signatures. I told him enough that the shape of it was visible the way a formation is visible when you have enough data points to sketch the outline, even if you cannot yet see the interior. When I finished, Marcus was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands, looking at the surface of his desk. Then he looked up. "She hired me," he said. The words landed in the office the way a core sample lands when it comes up from depth, heavy definitive carrying information from a place that was not previously accessible. "Tell me," I said, because it was his turn now. 3 weeks ago, Marcus said, and his jaw was tight in a way it had not been 30 seconds before. "A woman called the shop. Said she got my name from a medical transport service I'd done some contract work for. Back in 2021, patient transport, nothing complicated, just driving and basic assistance. She said she needed 2 people for a private medical transfer 1 day of work, $3,000 cash. Said the patient was an elderly man with cognitive difficulties who might be resistant to transport. He set the coffee cup down on the desk with a care that was controlled enough to tell me he wanted to set it down harder than he did. She did not tell me the patient's name. he said. I asked. She said the patient's privacy was protected under the arrangement, and I would receive all necessary documentation on the day of the transfer. He looked at me across the metal desk, and something moved across his face that was equal parts anger, and something I recognized as the particular shame of a man who has been used without his knowledge. Arthur, if I had known it was you— You didn't know, I said. That's why she didn't tell you. $3,000, he said, and he said it the way you say something that has become a different thing than it was when you agreed to it. I've got a transmission job sitting in Bay 2 that's been there for a month because the owner can't afford to pick it up. $3,000 looked like $3,000. I know what $3,000 looks like, I said. He was quiet again. The radio in the far bay had shifted to something slower, a man singing about a road somewhere south of where roads usually go in songs. Outside, a truck went past on Morris Street, and the windows rattled the way old windows rattle when they have been doing it long enough that the rattling is just part of how the building breathes. What do you need from me? Marcus said. The question came out clean and direct, without hesitation or qualification, the same way he had answered every question I had asked him in 19 hours under 12 feet of rock in 1987. Not what are you asking me to do? Not let me think about it. Not I need to know more before I commit. Just what do you need? The 4 words of a man who had already decided. I felt something loosen in my chest that I had not realized was tight. The woman who called you, I said. Do you still have the number? In my phone, he said, and I wrote it in the book. He nodded toward a battered spiral notebook on the corner of the desk, the kind of low-tech redundancy that men of a certain generation maintained without thinking about it, because they had grown up in a world where phones broke and numbers were lost, and the only reliable backup was ink on paper. I need you to keep the job, I said. Show up on the day she scheduled. Do exactly what she expects you to do, right up until the moment I tell you to do something different. Marcus looked at me steadily. And when is that moment? I'll know it when it comes, I said. And so will you. He picked up his coffee cup again and drank from it and set it back down and said, 30 years ago, you pulled me out of a hole in the ground in the middle of the night and you did not stop pulling until we were both on the surface. He looked at me across the desk. Tell me where to stand and I'll be there. I drove home through South Philadelphia in the early evening light, the sky going amber over the row houses and the corner stores and the church steeples that broke the skyline at intervals, like punctuation in a sentence that had been going on for 300 years. Marcus Webb's number was back in active rotation in my contacts. His shop address was written in the spiral notebook on my kitchen table. The team was 1 person larger than it had been this morning. It was not enough yet, but it was the right kind of start, the kind built on 30 years of shared history and 19 hours of shared darkness, and the particular loyalty that does not require explanation, because it was already proven before the words were ever needed. I had 1 more person to find, and she was going to be considerably harder to convince. Finding Ebony had taken 2 days and 1 piece of information I had not realized I possessed until I sat down and thought carefully about everything I had observed on the number 23 bus last Tuesday night. The lanyard? She had been wearing it when she boarded a hospital ID lanyard, the kind with a retractable clip and a laminated badge that hung face inward against her chest, the way medical staff sometimes wore them when they were off the clock, and did not particularly want to advertise where they worked to strangers on public transit. But the lanyard itself had a logo printed on it repeated at intervals along the nylon strap, the way institutional lanyards always do, and I had seen it clearly when she reached up to pull the stop cord before exiting the bus. Jefferson University Hospital. Blue letters on a white background. I had called Jefferson's main line the following morning and asked to speak with the pharmacy department, explaining that I was a patient who had received assistance from a technician named Ebony during a recent visit and wanted to send a letter of commendation. It was a small lie, the kind that causes no harm, and opens a door that would otherwise stay closed. The woman who answered transferred me to a supervisor, who confirmed after a brief hesitation that told me she was deciding how much to share, that, yes, they had a pharmacy technician by that name, and that if I wanted to send correspondence, I could address it to the department and it would be passed along. That was enough. I knew where she worked. I knew her shift schedule based on what I had seen. The pale blue scrubs, the exhaustion, the 10:14 bus on a Tuesday night meant she had likely finished a day shift that ended between 9 and 10. I wrote a note on plain paper, no return address, and had it delivered to the Jefferson Pharmacy Department by courier on Friday afternoon. It said, "I know what is in the folder. I am not your enemy. I need 20 minutes. Your choice of place and time, I will be there. AP." She chose a place called Manny's Coffee on Frankfurt Avenue. Sunday morning at 9. A small shop, the kind that had been there long enough that the regulars had their own mugs on a shelf behind the counter, and the owner knew everyone's order before they reached the register. She chose it, I understood, because she knew it, because it was familiar, ground her territory, a place where the people around her were people she recognized and who recognized her. She was not stupid. She was protecting herself the only way she could. I arrived at 8:45 and took a corner table with my back to the wall and a clear sightline to the door, ordered a black coffee from a man named Manny, who was in fact named Manny, and who asked if I wanted the usual, and then apologized when I told him I had not been in before. I told him the coffee was fine, and he seemed personally invested in proving that it was. Ebony walked in at 9:02. She was not wearing scrubs. She had on dark jeans and a burgundy sweater, and her hair was pulled back differently than it had been on the bus, and without the particular gravity of exhaustion that had weighted her on Tuesday night. She looked younger than I had initially estimated, 23, perhaps 24 at most. She scanned the room, when she entered found me in the corner, and stood in the doorway for a full 3 seconds before she walked toward the table. She did not sit down immediately. She stood on the other side of the table and looked at me with the careful measuring expression of someone who has learned that the distance between standing and sitting is the distance between being able to leave and having committed to staying. "How did you find me?" she said. Her voice was controlled, but her hands were not entirely. The fingers of her right hand were pressed flat against the side of her thigh, the way a person presses a hand against something when they are trying to keep it from moving. "The logo on your lanyard," I said. "You reached up to pull the stop cord. I saw Jefferson University Hospital." I kept my voice level and unhurried. "I am not here to cause you trouble, Ebony. I am here because I think you do not want to be doing what Charlotte Pendleton is making you do, and I think you have not been able to find a way out of it on your own." She sat down. Not with ease, she perched on the edge of the chair, with the posture of someone who had not yet decided whether the chair was a commitment or a temporary position. She picked up the menu that was already on the table and looked at it without reading it, and I recognized the gesture for what it was, a way to do something with her hands while she decided what to do with the rest of herself. "You read the folder," she said. "Enough of it," I said. "Then you know what she's holding over me." "The pay stubs," I said. "She has access to your payroll records somehow. She is threatening to interfere with your income if you do not cooperate with the clinical assessment." I paused. "What I do not know is how she got that access, or how long this has been going on, or what she told you when she first approached you." Ebony set the menu down. She looked at me across the table with an expression that had shifted from guarded to something more complicated, the expression of a person who has been waiting for someone to ask the right questions and is not yet sure whether to be relieved or more frightened that the right questions are finally being asked. "4 months ago," she said, "she came into the pharmacy. She said she was a healthcare administrator doing a compliance review. She seemed legitimate. She had credentials, a badge, the right vocabulary. She asked me questions about my role, my responsibilities, whether I ever had access to patient records. I answered honestly because I thought it was a routine audit." She stopped and pressed her lips together for a moment. 2 weeks later, she came back. Different tone entirely. She told me she knew I was a student extern, not a licensed technician, that I had been working hours that exceeded what my extern agreement permitted, that if she filed a complaint with the hospital and the state board, my externship would be terminated, and my application to complete my clinical hours would be jeopardized. She said it flatly without drama, the way you describe something that happened to you, that you have had to describe to yourself many times already in order to keep living with it. "She offered you an alternative," I said. "She said all I had to do was sign one clinical assessment form, that it was a formality, that the patient she did not tell me it was you, she never told me your name had already been evaluated by multiple physicians, and my signature was just an additional supporting document." Ebony's jaw tightened. I knew it was wrong. I knew the moment she described it that it was wrong, but I am 8 months from finishing my externship hours, 8 months from being eligible to sit for my licensing exam. If I lose this externship— She stopped, looked at the table, then back up at me. "I have $46,000 in student loans. I have been working toward this for 6 years. She knew exactly what she was threatening. She is good at identifying leverage, I said. She had my pay stubs, Ebony said, and there was something raw in her voice now, the particular rawness of someone describing a violation. I do not know how. They were in my bag. I had them because I was disputing a payroll error, and I needed them to show HR. She must have, I don't know how she got copies, but she had them and she used them to make it clear that she had access to things I thought were private. She pushed a breath out through her nose. I signed the form, one form, and then 2 weeks later there was another form, and then another. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and placed 2 items on the table between us. The printed photograph of the folder's cover page that I had taken with my phone on the bus, and a single-page summary of the BioVerify lab, results not the full report, just the key findings clear enough to understand without a medical degree. Ebony looked at both of them. She picked up the lab summary and read it with the focused attention of someone with medical training, her eyes moving down the page in the efficient vertical scan of a person who knows how to extract information from a clinical document quickly. When she reached the bottom, she set it down and looked at me, and her face had gone very still, in the way that faces go still when the thing you are looking at is worse than what you expected, and you need a moment before you can speak. She was poisoning you, Ebony said. She was engineering a situation in which legitimate physicians would find legitimate symptoms. I said. The forged signatures in the folder were the shortcut. The soup was the long game. Ebony pressed both hands flat on the table in front of her fingers, spread as if she needed the solidity of the surface beneath her palms. Her eyes were bright in a way that was not tears yet, but was close to the boundary of them. I signed forms saying you had cognitive impairment, she said, and her voice had dropped to something barely above a breath. I signed them because I was scared, and I told myself they were just paperwork, just additional documents, just... She stopped. Her throat moved. They were not just paperwork. No, I said. They were not. I could go to prison, she said. You could, I said, or you could help me make sure the people who should go to prison do. I leaned forward slightly. I am not interested in you, Ebony. I am interested in Charlotte, and in whoever is helping her. But I cannot do what needs to be done without someone on the inside who knows the clinical process and can testify to what Charlotte asked her to do and why. She looked at me for a long moment. The coffee shop moved around us, Manny calling out an order. The bell above the door, 2 women at the next table discussing something about a school schedule. The ordinary Sunday morning world continuing its business while we sat at a corner table and negotiated the terms of something that was going to change both our lives in ways that neither of us could fully see yet. You said you found me through the lanyard, Ebony said, but I need to tell you something. She straightened in her chair. I need to tell you that the lanyard was not an accident. I looked at her. I knew you were on that bus, she said. I had been watching Charlotte for 2 months before Tuesday night. I knew she visited you every Tuesday. I knew you sometimes took the bus. I sent you a message. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone and turned it toward me. On the screen was a text message sent to my number 6 days ago, before the Tuesday bus ride. 4 words. Bus 23, last row. I looked at the message, then I looked at her. Why, I said. Something moved across her face, not guilt, not relief, but the particular expression of someone who has been carrying a weight for long enough that putting it down is not simple, even when someone offers to take it. 2 years ago, she said, I was doing my first extern rotation at Presbyterian Medical Center. There was a patient, 74 years old, retired school teacher, sharp as anyone I had ever met. His son had filed a conservatorship petition. The clinical documentation looked legitimate. I did not know enough then to question it. She stopped. Her right hand, which had been resting on the table, curled slowly into a fist. He died in a memory care facility 8 months later. The autopsy found a neurotoxin. She met my eyes. They never charged anyone. The son had already liquidated the estate. By the time the autopsy results came back, there was nothing left to recover, and the son had moved to another state. The coffee shop was very loud and very quiet at the same time. You have been looking for another case, I said. I have been looking for someone who could fight back, she said. The patient at Presbyterian could not fight back. He did not know what was happening to him. She looked at me steadily. You were sitting in the last row of that bus, reading that folder like you were reading a geological survey. You were not panicking. You were not confused. You were working. A pause. I needed to know if you were the kind of man who could finish what I was starting. I thought about that for a moment, and I said, "You returned the folder without confronting me," she said. "You went to dinner at Charlotte's apartment anyway. You took a sample of the soup." Her eyes held mine, without wavering. "You already had a plan before you got off that bus. You just needed the evidence to build it on." Manny came by and refilled my coffee without being asked, the practiced attentiveness of a man who understood when a table needed to be left alone and when it needed something to do. I thanked him. Ebony ordered a tea she had not ordered when she sat down, which told me she had decided to stay longer than she had originally planned. "Tell me everything Charlotte asked you to do," I said. "Every form, every conversation, every date and time you can remember. I need all of it." Ebony wrapped both hands around the mug Manny set in front of her, and she began to talk, and she did not stop for 40 minutes, and by the time she finished, there were tears tracking down her face that she did not wipe away. And I had filled 6 pages of my spiral notebook with everything she said, and the outline of what we were going to do next was clearer than anything I had been able to see since Tuesday night. I reached across the table, and I shook her hand. "I told you I was not your enemy," I said. "I know," she said, and then quietly, with the voice of someone who has been alone with something too heavy to carry for too long, "I am glad you were in the last row. I have a system for paperwork. Eleanor used to say it was less a system than an affliction, and she was not entirely wrong. Every document that passed through this house, every bill, every statement, every contract, every letter, from any institution that had any claim on any aspect of our lives got sorted within 48 hours of arrival into one of 12 hanging file folders in the cabinet in the study, organized by category, and then by date within each category, oldest in the back, newest in the front. When a folder got too thick, I started a new one and labeled the old one with the date range on the tab in block letters and moved it to the archive box on the bottom shelf. 43 years of marriage produced 11 archive boxes. 12 years of working with Raymond Holt produced a separate cabinet entirely. I had not gone through that cabinet with any particular intention since Eleanor died. Raymond handled the active financial matters. I received the summaries. That had been the arrangement not out of laziness, but out of the reasonable trust of a man who had watched another person manage his affairs competently and carefully for a decade and had seen no reason to look over his shoulder. Trust, in my experience, is not given all at once. It builds incrementally the way sediment builds one layer at a time until the accumulation is so deep that you have stopped thinking about the individual layers and started thinking of the whole formation as solid ground. I pulled the Raymond cabinet out from the wall on Monday evening and sat down on the floor in front of it with a legal pad and the complete lab report and my spiral notebook and a cup of coffee that went cold while I worked. It took me 3 hours. The transfers I had identified in my personal bank statements, the 3 monthly payments of $800 to $1,200 going to an account I did not recognize, were only the beginning. When I went through the Raymond cabinet with the specific intention of finding anomalies rather than simply confirming that things were in order, the picture that emerged was considerably larger and considerably older than 11 months. There were investment account statements going back 4 years in which small reallocation fees, the kind of administrative charge that gets buried in the fine print of a quarterly report and is easy to overlook when the overall portfolio is performing adequately, had been accumulating at a rate that should have triggered a conversation with me and never had. Not because Raymond had hidden them precisely, they were there in the statements line, items with technical-sounding descriptions, the kind of language that is designed to be accurate enough to be defensible and opaque enough not to be questioned. Over 4 years, those fees added up to something in the range of $60,000, moving through accounts that Raymond managed on my behalf to destinations that were not clearly my own. $60,000, not $3 million, not the number on the conservatorship petition, but $60,000 that had been quietly redirected over 4 years was not a billing error. It was a practice run. And then I found the email. It was in the folder labeled Estate Correspondence, which contained copies of the letters and emails that Raymond's office had sent me over the years regarding the revision of my will after Eleanor died, the Germantown property sale, and 2 other smaller matters. Most of them were formal, properly formatted, the kind of communication that a law office sends when it is being careful about the record it creates. This one was different. It was a printout Raymond's office sometimes printed emails and mailed the physical copies to me as part of their document retention process for client files, an old-fashioned practice I had always found slightly redundant, but had never asked them to stop. This printout was dated 8 months ago. It was an email from Raymond's personal account, not his office account, his personal Gmail, to an address I recognized after a moment as Charlotte's personal email. And at the bottom of the recipient list in the CC field was my address. Raymond had copied me on an email he had sent to my daughter from his personal account. Not intentionally, the kind of mistake that happens when a person has multiple email windows open and clicks the wrong address from their autocomplete history. My name and Charlotte's name, both starting with the same letter, both in his contacts, both near each other, in the drop-down list that appears when you type the first 2 characters. He had sent it to Charlotte. He had accidentally copied me, and then apparently he had not noticed because no follow-up email had come, no retraction, no apology, no explanation. The email said, "Timeline is on track. The assessment documentation is complete. Current behavioral baseline is establishing cleanly, no physician flagging concerns yet. Recommend we hold the petition filing until the Q1 window to allow sufficient observation period. The asset transfer structure we discussed is ready to execute upon court approval. Confirm you have spoken with D regarding the offshore component." D. I read the email 4 times. Then I read it a 5th time more slowly, the way you read a core sample description when the formation does not match your preliminary model, and you need to make sure you have not misread the data. D. The offshore component. Confirm you have spoken with D. Charlotte had a brother, Daniel Pendleton, 48 years old, living in Vancouver, British Columbia, working in commercial real estate. My son. A man I had spoken to 3 weeks ago about a Vancouver Canucks game and whether he was coming down for Thanksgiving, a conversation that had felt entirely ordinary in every respect. The way all our conversations felt entirely ordinary, warm and unhurried, and without any subtext that I had ever detected. D was not necessarily Daniel. I was not going to conclude that it was Daniel based on a single initial in a single email. That was not how you built a case. You built a case on what the evidence actually said, not on what your fear wanted it to mean. But I wrote D Vancouver offshore component on the legal pad in my own block letters and drew a circle around it and set it in the "what I need to prove" column, and the shape of the formation I was mapping shifted in a way that made my chest go cold in a manner that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. I set the email printout aside and picked up my phone and called Raymond. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Arthur, this is a late call. Everything all right?" "Everything is fine," I said. I was going through some old paperwork and I had a question about the Germantown sale, specifically the closing costs breakdown. I cannot find the final settlement statement. "I can have Patricia pull the file tomorrow and send you a copy," Raymond said. Smooth, immediate. The practiced responsiveness of a man who had been doing this for 12 years and had no reason to believe that any particular phone call was different from any other. "That would be great," I said. "Sorry to call so late." "Not at all," Raymond said. "You know you can always reach me." I ended the call and sat on the floor of the study, surrounded by 12 years of paperwork, and looked at the email printout and the legal pad and the circle I had drawn around the letter D. Raymond Holt had been managing my financial affairs for 12 years. He had attended Eleanor's funeral and shaken my hand and told me she was a remarkable woman, which she was. He had called on my birthday for the last 6 years without fail. He had done all of this while simultaneously methodically and with considerable patience building the infrastructure of a scheme to help my daughter strip me of everything I owned. I thought about what it took to do something like that, not the mechanics of it. Those were clear enough from the paperwork, the interior of it, the daily practice of looking a man in the face and speaking to him with warmth and care while working steadily toward the moment when he would have nothing left that the warmth and care had not already been positioned to take. I did not allow myself to feel it fully, not yet. There would be time for that later, when this was over, and the outcome was certain. Right now, feeling it fully was a luxury I could not afford, the same way panic was a luxury I could not afford, for the same reason because I was the only person in a position to do what needed to be done, and doing it required everything I had, and grief and rage were expensive, and I was operating on a budget. I stacked the papers into a neat pile. I put the email printout in a separate folder I labeled Raymond Personal and put that folder in the fireproof safe next to the medical evidence binder. I wrote 3 items on the legal pad and underlined each of them twice. Do not confront Raymond. Do not let him know what I have found. Call Marcus in the morning. Then I turned off the study light and went to bed and lay in the dark in the house on Clearfield Street that my daughter and someone called D and the man I had trusted with my financial life for 12 years were planning to take from me, and I breathed slowly and steadily and thought about what the next step looked like, and by the time I fell asleep sometime after 2 in the morning, I knew exactly what it was. Marcus picked up on the first ring. I was wondering when you'd call, he said. Couldn't sleep either. I slept, I said. 2 hours, that was enough. I was standing at the kitchen window with my 3rd coffee of the morning, watching the October light come up gray and flat over the row houses on Clearfield Street, the kind of Philadelphia morning that cannot decide whether it wants to be overcast or clear and settles for both at once. Charlotte is going to call you this week about the security system in her apartment. A pause. How do you know that? Because I know Charlotte, I said. She is meticulous. She will want to walk through the logistics of the transfer day before she commits to a final date. Part of that will be confirming that her apartment is clean, no recording devices, no surveillance she did not put there herself. She will want someone she trusts to verify it. And she trusts me because she hired me, Marcus said. She trusts you because she thinks you need the money, and people who need money are reliable in the way she understands reliable, I said. She will ask you to check the system. What I need you to do when you go in is leave something behind instead of just looking. The silence on his end was the silence of a man doing a calculation, not the silence of a man who was uncertain about the answer. You want me to place a recording device, Marcus said. A specific kind, I said. I need you to listen to me carefully because the way this is done matters as much as the fact that it is done. I had spent 40 minutes the previous night in the time between setting the legal pad down and finally closing my eyes reading the relevant sections of federal wiretapping law on my phone. Pennsylvania is a 2-party consent state, which means that recording a private conversation without the knowledge of all parties is illegal under state law. A recording made that way would be inadmissible in a Pennsylvania court and potentially illegal for me to possess. But federal law operates differently. Under the Federal Electronic Communications Privacy Act, 18 United States Code, Section 2511. A recording is legal if at least one party to the conversation has consented to it. One party, not all parties. 1. Marcus Webb. If he was present in Charlotte's apartment and participating in a conversation with Charlotte and Raymond Holt, was himself a party to that conversation. His consent to record it was sufficient under federal law to make the recording admissible in a federal proceeding. And what Charlotte and Raymond had done, the forged court documents, the financial fraud, the wire transfers, the offshore component referenced in Raymond's email, crossed enough jurisdictional lines to make this a federal proceeding. You need to be in the room when they talk, I said. Not just planting a device and leaving. You need to be present, which makes you a consenting party to any conversation that takes place. That is what makes it legal. And if they do not talk while I am there, they will, I said. Charlotte does not bring people into her space without extracting something from the visit. She will confirm details. She will say things out loud because she believes the space is secure and you are an employee, and neither of those things is a threat to her. I drank my coffee. She has been managing this plan for the better part of a year. At this stage, she is not careful because she does not believe she needs to be. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What kind of device?" "Small, digital, voice-activated to preserve battery. The kind that is legal to purchase, legal to own, and legal to operate when the person operating it is a consenting party to the recorded conversation. I had already ordered it. It would arrive by Thursday. I will show you exactly where to put it and how to retrieve it." Charlotte called Marcus on Wednesday afternoon, which was 24 hours earlier than I had expected, and which told me she was moving faster than the Q1 timeline Raymond had recommended in his email. Something had accelerated her schedule. I did not know what yet, but the acceleration itself was information. It meant she was feeling pressure from somewhere, and pressure meant she was more likely to be careless. Marcus called me from the parking lot outside her building immediately after hanging up with her. "Friday evening," he said. 6 o'clock. She wants me to check the door locks, the window latches, and the building intercom system. She said she has been having security concerns. The dry flatness in his voice when he said security concerns told me exactly what he thought of Charlotte's stated reason for the visit. Raymond will be there, I said. It was not a question. She mentioned she would have a colleague present to walk through the logistics of a scheduled procedure, Marcus said. She said it was routine paperwork. Routine paperwork. The vocabulary of a woman who had been describing what she was doing in the most neutral language available for so long that the language had become reflexive. The device arrived Thursday morning in a plain brown package, a digital audio recorder the size of a thumb drive, voice-activated with 40 hours of storage capacity and a battery life that would outlast any reasonable conversation by a considerable margin. I drove it to Marcus's garage on Morris Street that afternoon and showed him how to activate it, how to verify it was running, and where to place it in Charlotte's apartment for optimal audio capture behind the base of the landline phone on the kitchen counter, which was where Charlotte conducted serious conversations, because it was the room with the most ambient noise from the street below, which she believed made it harder to record from outside. She was right that ambient street noise complicated external surveillance. She had not considered internal placement. Marcus listened to everything I told him with the focused attention of a man who understands that the details of a technical procedure are not suggestions. He asked 2 questions, both specific and practical, and I answered both. Then he put the device in his shirt pocket and buttoned the pocket closed. 6 o'clock Friday, he said. 6 o'clock Friday. I confirmed. After you leave, go directly home. Do not call me from the parking lot. Call me from your landline when you are inside with the door locked. He nodded. Then he said something that surprised me in its directness. Arthur, what do you think they are going to say in there? I looked at him across the metal desk in the small office at the back of the garage. I think they are going to say enough, I said. Marcus went in on Friday at 6:03. He came out at 7:21. He called me from his landline at 7:44 and said 4 words before he said anything else. You need to hear this. He drove to my house on Clearfield Street with the recorder in his shirt pocket, and we sat at my kitchen table, and he set it down between us and pressed play, and Charlotte's voice came into the room the way something comes into a room when it has been kept out for a long time, and the door is finally opened sudden and real and impossible to close again. She was not alone. Raymond's voice came in underneath hers, measured and certain, the voice of a man discussing a project he had complete confidence in. They talked for 31 minutes. They covered the filing timeline, the court date, the asset transfer sequence, the name of the facility in Vancouver, where the offshore account was registered. And then Raymond said a name, not D, the full name. Clearly without any attempt at discretion, in the tone of a man who believed absolutely that the room he was standing in was a room that no one else would ever hear. Daniel Raymond said, Your brother confirmed the Vancouver transfer is ready to execute on his end the moment the court order clears. I sat at my kitchen table and listened to the voice of the man who had managed my financial affairs for 12 years speak my son's name in a context that made everything I had been trying not to conclude for the past week unavoidable. Daniel. My son was not in Vancouver, waiting to hear how his father was doing. My son was in Vancouver managing the receiving end of a wire transfer that was waiting for a court order that his sister was engineering with the help of my attorney to strip me of $3 million and whatever years I had left, of living in my own house, in my own name, with my own mind, acknowledged as my own. Marcus reached across the table and stopped the recording. He did not say anything. He looked at me with the steady, direct attention of a man who understood that some things required a moment before they required a response. And he let me have the moment without filling it with words that would not have helped. My hands were flat on the table in front of me. They were not shaking. I noticed that the way I had noticed it on the bus, the absence of shaking, and I understood it the same way. Not because I was not feeling it, because I was feeling it in a place that was too deep for shaking to reach. Play it again, I said. From the beginning. I need to hear all of it. The hardest part was not the forgetting. Any actor will tell you that the easiest emotion to perform is confusion, because confusion requires you to do less rather than more, to hesitate where you would normally be, certain to reach for a word and come back empty, to look at a familiar object as though it has become slightly foreign overnight. The body understands subtraction better than addition. What I had to do was remove things, remove the sharpness from my eyes, remove the decisiveness from my movements, remove the particular quality of attention that people who had known me for years would recognize as me. What was hard was doing it to Gloria Marsh. Mrs. Gloria Marsh lived in the brick row house directly next to mine on Clearfield Street, and had done so for 31 years, which meant she had been my neighbor for almost as long as I had owned the house. She was 72 years old, a retired school librarian, and she possessed the particular combination of genuine warmth and exhaustive observational precision that I had come to think of as the special gift of women who spend their careers watching children and noticing everything. She had brought food after Eleanor died. She had taken in my mail during the 2 weeks I spent in the hospital the previous winter with a kidney stone that my internist called manageable, and I called the worst experience of my adult life. She knocked on my door every Sunday morning to return whatever she had borrowed during the week, a cup of sugar, a Phillips head screwdriver, the particular brand of dish soap she could only find at my grocery store, and stayed for 45 minutes of conversation that I had always looked forward to more than I admitted. Deceiving Gloria Marsh felt like kicking a porch light. Necessary maybe in certain circumstances, still a small, mean act. But I needed Charlotte to hear about my decline from someone credible, not from Raymond, whose information she would expect, not from Marcus, whose involvement she did not fully trust yet, from a neighbor, from someone with no stake in the outcome, no reason to embellish, no agenda, beyond the simple human concern of a woman who had watched me carry Eleanor's groceries up these front steps for 3 decades and did not want to watch me disappear. I started on a Monday. I went to the corner store on Kensington Avenue at 9 in the morning, wearing the flannel shirt I saved for yard work, the one with the fraying cuff that Eleanor had wanted to throw away 4 times, and that I had rescued from the donation bag twice. I bought a loaf of bread and a quart of milk, and I paid with a $20 bill. And when the young man behind the counter gave me my change, I stared at the coins in my palm for a long moment, with the expression of someone doing arithmetic in a language they only partially speak. "Sir," the young man said, "you okay?" "Yes," I said slowly. "Yes, I looked at the coins again, put them in my pocket without counting them. "Thank you, son." I walked home on the wrong side of the street for half a block before crossing back. Not dramatically, just the mild, unhurried drift of a man whose internal compass had gone slightly unreliable. Gloria was deadheading her window boxes across the front of her house when I came up the block. She watched me cross the street with the focused attention of a woman who noticed things and thought about what they meant. "Arthur," she called, "you feeling all right this morning?" "Fine, fine," I said, waving a hand. "Just tired. I keep forgetting which way I'm going." I smiled the smile of a man laughing gently at himself. "Getting old, Gloria?" She did not laugh back. She watched me go inside with an expression that I recognized even with my back turned, because I had seen it on Eleanor's face once. Years ago, directed at Eleanor's own mother, the expression of a woman who has just seen something that she is going to be thinking about for the rest of the day. Good. I called Charlotte that afternoon from the house phone, which I still had, because Eleanor had insisted on keeping it and I had never disconnected it after she died. I called in the middle of a sentence, not at the beginning where it would have been planned, but in the middle, as though I had started talking before I finished dialing. Charlotte picked up and said, "Dad," and I said, and then I couldn't remember where I'd put the insurance papers, the ones from the and let the sentence trail into a confused pause that lasted 4 full seconds. "Dad," her voice sharpened immediately the way Charlotte's voice had always sharpened when she believed she was the most competent person in a situation. "Dad, slow down. What insurance papers?" I thought I called the doctor," I said. "Did I call you by mistake?" A brief silence on her end. Then carefully, "You called me Dad. That's fine. Do you need me to come over?" No, I said. "I'm fine. I just get turned around sometimes. You know how it is." After I hung up, I sat in the kitchen and listened to the quiet of the house and felt something I had not expected to feel, which was a clean, cold anger that had nothing theatrical about it. Not at Charlotte for believing the performance she was supposed to believe it, that was the point. At the fact that the performance was easy. At the fact that when I dialed her number and opened my mouth and produced the voice of a confused old man, something in her had immediately, automatically, and with evident satisfaction begun to believe that the thing she had been engineering for the better part of a year was already working. She had wanted this. She had wanted it specifically personally, with the investment of someone who had spent 8 months building toward a conclusion and needed the conclusion to be real. The relief in her voice when I said I got turned around sometimes was not the relief of a daughter who was worried about her father. It was the relief of a person who had been waiting a long time for the story to start going the way they needed it to go. Gloria called Charlotte the following Thursday. I knew she had called because Charlotte called me 20 minutes after Gloria would have hung up, and her voice had taken on the particular texture of someone managing an emotion they did not want to name out loud. Mrs. Marsh called me today, Charlotte said. She said she saw you walking on the wrong side of the street on Monday, and that you seemed confused at the corner store. I let a beat go by. Did she? Dad? A pause that was working very hard. I think we should talk about what kind of support you might need, just to make sure you're safe. I'm safe, I said. I just had a bad morning. Everyone has bad mornings. Of course, Charlotte said, and her voice warmed in the way it warmed when she was getting what she wanted, and was being careful not to show it. Of course you do. I just love you, Dad. I want to make sure you're okay. After I hung up the second time, I called Marcus. She's moving, I said. How soon? He said. Weeks, I said. Not months. She just confirmed it without knowing she confirmed it. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Does Ebony know? I'm calling her next, I said. Tell me your schedule is clear for the first 2 weeks of December. My schedule, Marcus said, has been clear since the day you walked into my garage. I hung up and stood at the kitchen window and looked out at Clearfield Street in the late October afternoon, the trees dropping the last of their leaves in the particular tired way that late October trees do, as though they have been holding on long enough and have simply decided that enough is enough. Somewhere across the city, Charlotte was calling Raymond. I could not hear it, but I knew what she was saying. She was saying it was time. The William J. Green Federal Building sits on Arch Street in Center City, Philadelphia, 12 floors of glass and concrete that houses, among other things, the Philadelphia field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I had driven past it hundreds of times over the course of my life without ever having occasion to go inside. I parked in a garage 2 blocks east on a Tuesday morning in early November, walked the 2 blocks with a manila envelope under my arm, and went through the security screening at the lobby entrance with the same deliberate calm I had been applying to everything for the past 3 weeks. The agent who eventually came down to meet me in the lobby waiting area was a woman named Special Agent Carla Reyes, 30-something, dark jacket, the kind of composed professional attention that told me she had heard a great many people describe situations they believed were urgent and had learned to assess credibility quickly without showing the assessment on her face. She shook my hand and led me to a conference room on the 4th floor and set a legal pad on the table in front of her and looked at me with the patient-focused expression of someone who was prepared to listen for as long as listening was warranted. Mr. Pendleton, she said, tell me what brought you in today. So I told her. I had organized it the way I organized field reports chronologically, with the evidence presented in the order it was obtained, each item introduced with its source, its date, and its relevance to the item that followed. I had the lab report from BioVerified Diagnostics with its complete chain of custody documentation. I had the photographed pages of the conservatorship petition folder. I had the printed email that Raymond had CC'd to me by mistake 8 months ago. I had the bank statements with the highlighted transfers. I had the audio recording from Charlotte's apartment, accompanied by a 1-page summary of the federal wiretapping statute, and Marcus Webb's signed statement confirming his presence as a consenting party during the recorded conversation. Agent Reyes did not interrupt. She made notes on her legal pad, small and precise, and when I finished, she looked at what I had spread across the conference table and was quiet for a moment in the way that people are quiet when they are not uncertain about what they are looking at, but want to be careful about what they say first. The audio recording, she said. Your associate, Mr. Webb, he was physically present in the apartment during the entirety of the recorded conversation. He was, I said, he was present from 6:03 to 7:21. The recording covers that full period. His presence as a consenting party satisfies the federal one-party consents requirement under 18 United States Code, Section 2511. She looked at me over the legal pad. You have done some reading. I am a geologist, I said. Reading the available literature before I go into the field is a professional habit. Something moved at the corner of her mouth that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. She looked back at the documents. The court order and the conservatorship petition. You are saying it was issued by a sitting judge based on fraudulent clinical documentation? The court order is real, I said. Judge Patricia Owens signed it. The documentation she relied upon to sign it, the clinical assessments, the physician's signatures are fabricated. 3 of the 4 physician names on the assessment forms do not appear in the Pennsylvania Medical License Database. I checked 2 nights ago. Agent Reyes set her pen down. If that is accurate, the fraudulent documentation was submitted to a federal court officer to obtain a legal order. That moves this from a state fraud matter into federal jurisdiction. Which is why I came here rather than to the district attorney, I said. She picked up the audio recording transcript. I had prepared a written summary of the 31-minute conversation, time-stamped with the relevant passages highlighted in yellow. She read through it without speaking. When she reached the section where Raymond said Daniel's name and described the Vancouver transfer account, she stopped and read that section twice. The offshore account, she said. Vancouver, British Columbia. If funds were to be transferred from a Pennsylvania state account to a foreign account as part of a fraud scheme that constitutes wire fraud under federal statute. 18 United States Code, Section 1343. She looked up. Mr. Pendleton, are you willing to cooperate fully with a federal investigation, including providing testimony? That is why I am here, I said. What happened in the 3 weeks that followed was not dramatic in the way that investigations are dramatic in films, where evidence is processed in hours and decisions are made in rooms with glass walls, and everyone moves with the urgent purposefulness of people who know they are being watched. Real investigations move the way geological processes move, with patience and pressure, and the slow accumulation of force that looks from the outside like nothing is happening right up until the moment everything shifts at once. Agent Reyes and her team verified the physician names against the Pennsylvania Medical License Database and confirmed that 2 of the 3 did not exist, and the 3rd had retired and surrendered his license 4 years ago. They ran the bank account receiving the monthly transfers from my statements and traced it to a shell company registered in Delaware, the state of choice for businesses that valued privacy over transparency, a legal but telling choice. They issued a subpoena for Raymond Holt's financial records, which required a separate legal proceeding because of attorney-client privilege, and which was granted under the crime-fraud exception, the legal principle that attorney-client privilege does not protect communications made in furtherance of a crime. Judge Patricia Owens was notified by the FBI on a Wednesday afternoon that the conservatorship order she had signed had been obtained through fraudulent documentation. Agent Reyes told me about the call in a brief update the following day. She said Judge Owens had been quiet for a long moment after hearing the details, and then had said, with the controlled fury of a woman who took the integrity of her courtroom with the seriousness it deserved, that she wanted the people who had submitted false documentation to her court identified and prosecuted to the full extent of federal law, and that she would make herself personally available to assist the investigation in any way the Bureau required. I had never met Judge Owens, but when Agent Reyes described that phone call, I felt something that I recognized as the particular relief of a person who has been operating alone for long enough that discovering an unexpected ally lands with more force than expected. On the last Friday of November, Agent Reyes called me at home. "We have enough," she said. "We are ready to move when you are. We need a date and a location." I looked at my spiral notebook open on the kitchen table to the page where I had written 3 weeks ago, December 4th. The date I had calculated based on Charlotte's accelerating timeline, her conversation with Raymond in the recorded audio, and the particular momentum of a person who has convinced themselves the hard part is already over. December 4th, I said. My house on Clearfield Street. I will make sure she comes to me. "We will be there," Agent Reyes said. "Mr. Pendleton, you built a solid case. Most people who walk in here without an attorney do not know what they have. You knew exactly what you had. 40 years of field work," I said. "You learn to bring back what matters and leave the rest in the ground." I hung up and sat at the kitchen table in the quiet house on Clearfield Street and wrote one word at the top of a fresh page in the spiral notebook. December. Marcus had pushed both cars out of the garage bays and set up 3 folding chairs in the space where they usually sat, which told me he had been thinking about this meeting differently than a casual conversation, more like a briefing, the kind that requires room to move and a clear sightline between everyone in the room. He had a space heater running in the corner against the November chill that had settled into the concrete floor, and a folding table against the wall with a coffee maker and 3 mugs that did not match the kind of domestic practicality that men of a certain generation apply to everything without commenting on it. Ebony arrived 3 minutes after I did. She came in through the side door in her regular clothes dark coat, the burgundy sweater I recognized from the coffee shop, a canvas bag over one shoulder that she set on the floor beside her chair with the careful deliberateness of someone who has learned not to leave her belongings unattended. She looked at the garage at Marcus at the folding chairs arranged in a triangle, and then she looked at me with the expression of a person who is committed to something and is now standing in the physical reality of what they committed to and finding it more concrete than the abstract version had been. "This is really happening," she said. "December 4th, I said. 18 days. She sat down. Marcus poured 3 coffees and distributed them without asking how anyone took theirs, which was either presumptuous or efficient, depending on your perspective, and which Ebony accepted without comment, which told me she was a person who understood the difference. I had prepared a single sheet of paper for each of them, not a document, just a timeline. 6 events each with a time, a location, and a 1-sentence description of what needed to happen. I had written them by hand rather than printing them, which was partly habit and partly the instinct of a man who had spent 3 weeks thinking about what left a paper trail and what did not. I walked them through it. Charlotte would arrive at my house on Clearfield Street between 10 and 11 in the morning. She would bring Marcus, whom she believed was her employee, and a second transport aide she had hired independently. She would have the court order, the clinical documentation, and a private ambulance staged outside. She would expect to find me confused, compliant, and incapable of meaningful resistance. Ebony would arrive separately in her hospital identification, in her role as the supervising clinical nurse Charlotte had designated to oversee the transfer and verify the documentation on site. Charlotte had arranged this herself, which meant Charlotte trusted it, which meant it was the cleanest possible position from which to do what Ebony needed to do. What Ebony needed to do was wait, walk in, verify the documentation as requested. And then, at the precise moment, Charlotte believed everything was proceeding according to plan refuse. "Walk me through the refusal," Marcus said. He was leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, coffee mug held in both hands, watching Ebony with the focused attention of someone running a stress test. Ebony straightened in her chair. Something shifted in her posture, not dramatically, but definitively, the way a person's posture shifts when they stop thinking about something and start doing it. "I will not implement this transfer order," she said, "because the clinical documentation supporting it contains forged signatures from physicians who are not licensed to practice medicine in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. The patient Arthur Pendleton does not meet the clinical criteria for involuntary conservatorship under Pennsylvania. Statute 20, Section 5100. I am terminating my participation in this procedure, and I am prepared to provide a full written statement to that effect to any supervising authority." The garage was quiet except for the space heater and the distant sound of a truck on Morris Street. Marcus looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at me. "She's ready?" he said. "I have been ready for 2 years," Ebony said, and the flatness in her voice was not coldness. It was the particular quality of a person who has been waiting a long time for something they needed badly and has finally stopped waiting. We spent the next hour going through every variation we could construct, Charlotte losing her composure and becoming aggressive, the second transport aide attempting to physically intervene, Charlotte threatening Ebony with the extern violation again. We ran each scenario until Ebony's response was the same every time, not identical words, but identical in its steadiness, in its refusal to be moved by pressure that had previously moved her. Somewhere in the second hour, Marcus mentioned Daniel. He had been monitoring flight information from Vancouver through a contact he had at the airport, not official, not documented, the informal network of a man who had spent 30 years in industries where knowing things before other people knew them was a professional asset. Daniel Pendleton had a one-way ticket booked from Vancouver International to Philadelphia International on the morning of December 4th, arriving at 11:45, one way. He was not coming to visit. He was coming to receive. Ebony looked at me when Marcus said it. I was looking at the timeline on the folding table at the 6 events written in my own block letters, and I was thinking about Daniel at 30 years old, calling me from his first apartment in Vancouver because the radiator was making a sound. he did not recognize, and he was not sure if it was supposed to do that, and I had talked him through it over the phone for 20 minutes. The particular patience of a father for a son who is competent at everything except the things he has not learned yet, and I had hung up feeling the uncomplicated satisfaction of being useful to someone you love. One-way ticket, December 4th. Arriving at 11:45, I picked up the timeline sheet and looked at it and added a 7th line at the bottom in different handwriting than the first 6, smaller and more deliberate, the handwriting of a man adding something he had known was coming, but had not wanted to write down until he had no choice. Daniel. PHL 11:45. FBI intercept. "Are you all right?" Ebony said. I folded the timeline and put it in my jacket pocket. "I have been better," I said. "I have also been worse." I looked at both of them across the triangle of folding chairs in Marcus's garage, the space heater humming in the corner, the November dark pressing against the high windows. 18 days. We do not contact each other by phone unless it is necessary. We do not change anything about our routines. We show up on December 4th, and we do what we said we were going to do. Marcus set down his coffee mug. And Charlotte. I thought about Charlotte at 8 years old, on the back steps with her popsicle telling me, with the absolute certainty of a child, who has not yet learned that certainty requires evidence that she was going to be a lawyer because she was good at arguing. She had been right about that. She had argued her way into a position that should have been unassailable. She had built something meticulous and layered and very nearly perfect. Nearly. Charlotte, I said, is going to find out that nearly is the most expensive word in the English language. I drove home through the November dark with the timeline folded in my jacket pocket, and 7 lines instead of 6, and the 7th line sat in my chest the way a stone sits in still water, heavy settled and impossible to pretend was not there. There is a particular quality to the last days before something inevitable. Not suspense exactly. Suspense implies uncertainty about the outcome, and by the last week of November, I had moved past uncertainty into something more austere, a focused, narrow clarity that felt less like confidence than like the absence of any remaining alternative. The plan was in motion. The evidence was documented. The FBI was positioned. The only variable still outside my control was Charlotte herself. And Charlotte, I had learned over the course of 7 weeks, was most predictable when she believed she was in control of everything. She believed that now. I could hear it in the recordings. I had listened to the audio from Charlotte's apartment 4 times in the 2 weeks since Marcus retrieved the device. Not obsessively purposefully, the way you listen to a piece of evidence when you are building a case and need to know not just what was said, but how it was said, what the pauses meant, where the confidence was real and where it was performance. Charlotte and Raymond had talked for 31 minutes on that Friday evening in late October, and in those 31 minutes they had said everything I needed them to say, and several things I had not anticipated. The things I needed: the filing timeline, the court date, the asset transfer sequence. Raymond's confirmation that the clinical documentation was complete and in order, Charlotte's confirmation that the private transport was arranged. All of it said in the unhurried, businesslike tone of 2 people reviewing a project that was on schedule and proceeding without complications. The things I had not anticipated: Raymond mentioned a secondary account I had not found in my initial review of the financial statements, a trust account established in my name 14 months ago that had been quietly accumulating funds redirected from my investment portfolio through a series of small reallocation transactions that would not trigger automatic review. The trust account, Raymond said, was currently holding $420,000. It would be folded into the conservatorship estate at the time of transfer and would disappear into the Vancouver offshore structure before any independent audit could trace its origin. $420,000 I had not known existed in an account in my name, that I had not opened holding money from my own portfolio, that I had not moved. Raymond had been more thorough than I realized. He had not been running a practice scheme for 4 years. He had been running the actual scheme for 4 years. The $3 million in the conservatorship petition was the number Charlotte needed for the legal filing. The real number was larger. I added the trust account to the evidence package I had already provided Agent Reyes and called her office the following Monday morning. She confirmed they had identified the account through the subpoena on Raymond's financial records and had already added it to the charges being prepared. She said it with the brisk efficiency of someone for whom this additional amount was confirmation rather than surprise. which told me the FBI's picture of what Raymond had been doing was broader than what I had managed to assemble from my own kitchen floor. That was a relief. I was good at reading rock. Agent Reyes was better at reading money. It was Gloria Marsh who told me about Raymond. She knocked on my door on a Wednesday afternoon in the third week of November, which was unusual because Gloria knocked on Sunday mornings and not on other days unless something had prompted her. And I had learned over 31 years of neighboring that when Gloria knocked on a day that was not Sunday, something had prompted her. "I am sorry to bother you," she said, standing on my front stoop in her winter coat, a casserole dish covered in foil held in both hands with the particular grip of a woman using a task to explain a visit that the task was not actually the reason for. "I made too much chicken and rice. I thought you might want some." I took the casserole dish and thanked her and held the door open, and she came in, which was what we both understood was going to happen. She sat at my kitchen table, and I poured 2 cups of tea, and she wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at the table for a moment before she looked at me. "There was a man outside this week," she said, "Tuesday and again on Thursday. Silver-haired, nice coat. He parked on the opposite side of the street and sat in his car for about 40 minutes each time. He was looking at your house, Arthur, not at the neighborhood, at your house specifically." Raymond Holt drove a silver Audi and owned 3 suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He had silver hair. He wore coats that were designed to look like they were not trying. "Did he get out of the car?" I said. "Thursday he did. He walked up to the corner and stood there for a few minutes looking at the block." Gloria's hands tightened around her mug. I wrote down his license plate. I do not know why exactly. It felt like the right thing to do. She reached into her coat pocket and put a folded piece of paper on the table between us. "I watch this street, Arthur. I have watched it for 31 years, and I know what belongs here and what does not." I unfolded the paper and looked at the plate number. I already knew whose car it was, but the confirmation settled into me with the particular weight of information that changes not what you know, but how solidly you know it. Raymond had been checking on me, making sure I was still at the address, still accessible, still playing the part of a man too confused to notice a silver Audi parked across the street for 40 minutes on a Tuesday afternoon. I folded Gloria's paper and put it in my shirt pocket. "Thank you," I said. "You were right to write it down." She looked at me with the focused attention of a woman who had been watching children and their parents and the spaces between what people said and what they meant for 30 years of professional life and another 30 of neighborhood life. And she said with the careful directness of someone who has decided to ask a thing rather than continue wondering about it, "Arthur, are you in some kind of trouble?" Exploitation pistol. I looked at her across my kitchen table, at the woman who had brought food when Eleanor died, and taken in my mail and knocked on my door every Sunday morning for 31 years. And I made a decision I had not planned to make. I said, "I am working on not being anymore." She held my gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded once, the nod of a woman who understood that this was the complete answer she was going to receive and who had decided that it was enough. "The chicken and rice reheats well," she said. 400 degrees 20 minutes keep the foil on." She finished her tea and went home, and I stood at the front window and watched her cross the yard to her own front door. And then I looked past her at the empty street where Raymond's silver Audi had sat for 40 minutes on 2 separate afternoons, while he watched my house and confirmed to himself that everything was proceeding according to plan. 8 days. Charlotte was looking at the same calendar I was looking at. She was seeing 8 days until everything she had built for a year came together into something legal and permanent and impossible to reverse. She was feeling the particular satisfaction of a person who has done the hard work and can see the finish line and believes the only thing left is to cross it. She had not looked at the finish line carefully enough. I went back to my kitchen table and opened the spiral notebook and looked at the 7-line timeline and did not add anything to it because there was nothing left to add. Everything was already in motion. The only thing left was December 4th. I was awake at 4:47, not because an alarm had gone off, because my body had been keeping track of the calendar for 8 weeks and knew without being told that today was the day the accounting came due. I lay in the dark for 11 minutes and watched the bedside clock. 4:47 to 4:58. Eleanor's side of the bed was as it had been for 6 years empty. I looked at the pillow and thought about her for exactly as long as I could afford to. Then I got up. I made coffee and stood at the kitchen window, watching Clearfield Street in the pre-dawn dark. I had laid out what I was going to wear the night before: dark trousers, the navy jacket, worn twice, a white shirt. Not dressed for performance, dressed for the occasion as I understood it, a man standing in his own home, receiving what was coming to him, with the dignity of someone who had spent 8 weeks making sure it arrived correctly. At 7:15, my phone rang. Gloria Marsh. There is a private ambulance parked at the end of the block since 6:45. No hospital name on the side. It has not moved. Something settled in my chest, not calm, but readiness. Be careful today, she said. I intend to, I said. I texted Agent Reyes 3 words: they are here. Her response came in 40 seconds. We are in position. I texted Marcus and Ebony 1 word each: ready. Ebony's reply took 90 seconds. Then ready. Then 3 seconds later, thank you for being in the last row. I washed my face with cold water and looked in the mirror. 70 years old. Patient. Precise. I put on the navy jacket and said quietly, the way you say something that does not require emphasis to be true, not today. At 9:40, Marcus texted Charlotte's car just turned onto your block. I set the coffee cup in the spot where Eleanor had kept hers for 31 years. I walked to the living room and sat in the chair whose arms were worn smooth on the right side from 40 years of the same hand resting in the same place. 3 sharp knocks at the front door. I breathed in once fully the way you breathe before a descent into ground that has not been mapped. Then I stood up and I walked to the door and I opened it. Before I reveal the brutal showdown, right in my living room, comment the words, still here, so I know you're still tracking with me on this journey. Also, please note, the following twists include some framed creative elements to heighten the drama and life lessons. If that isn't for you, feel free to turn off the video right here. Charlotte was wearing black. Not morning black, professional black, the kind she wore when she had a meeting that required her to be taken seriously. A structured blazer over a dark turtleneck hair, pulled back with the precision of someone who had spent time on it without wanting to appear to have spent time on it. Under her left arm, a leather portfolio zipper, closed documents organized and ready. Behind her stood Marcus in the navy work shirt, with his name stitched above the pocket, his face arranged in the careful neutrality of a man performing a professional role. Behind Marcus stood a second man, younger, broader, hired for physical presence. At the end of my front walk, the private ambulance idled at the curb. Charlotte stepped into my house the way she had stepped into rooms her entire life, fully without hesitation. She looked at me and arranged warmth over intention, the expression I now understood with the precision of long practice. Good morning, Dad. How are you feeling today? A little confused, I said. I wasn't expecting company. Relief moved behind her eyes, quick and controlled. She believed me. She placed 2 documents on the coffee table. The court-order judge, Patricia Owens' signature in blue ink, the raised seal of the Court of Common, pleas of Philadelphia County, real and official, and built entirely on documents that were not. The clinical summary, 3 physician names, 3 signatures. 2 of those physicians did not exist. The third had surrendered his license 4 years ago. The FBI knew all of it. The front door pushed inward. Ebony walked in wearing her hospital lanyard and clinical coat, carrying a tablet. Her eyes met mine for exactly 1 second. Then she looked at Charlotte. Miss Pendleton, I need to review the transfer documentation before we proceed. Charlotte gestured toward the table. Verify the patient ID, and then we can move. Ebony read the clinical summary with the efficient focus of someone who knew exactly what she was looking for. Then she set it down. I am not going to implement this transfer. Her voice did not waver. The clinical documentation is fraudulent. Arthur Pendleton does not meet the criteria for involuntary conservatorship under Pennsylvania Statute 20, Section 5100. The transfer order is void. Charlotte's face went still in the wrong way. You are a nursing student, Charlotte said, her voice dropping to its lowest register. 8 months from your licensing exam, currently in violation of your extern agreement. Sign the transfer acknowledgement right now, or your career is over before it starts. Ebony did not step back. I understand you completely, she said, and my answer is no. Charlotte. My voice came out quiet and certain. She turned. I was standing, the unfocus completely gone from my eyes. There is something you should know about Ebony's nursing career. I looked at my daughter across the coffee table. It is not yours to end. Nothing in this room is yours to end, not today. Charlotte opened her mouth to respond. She did not get the chance. The hallway door came open, and Agent Carla Reyes walked in, first badge in her left hand, arrest warrant in her right, followed by 4 federal agents who moved through my living room with the quiet, deliberate efficiency of people who had done this enough times that it no longer required urgency to be effective. They did not shout. They did not rush. They simply arrived the way consequences arrive, without announcement, without apology, and without any remaining possibility of negotiation. Charlotte Pendleton. Agent Reyes's voice was even and clear. You are under arrest for medical document fraud, financial fraud, and conspiracy to unlawfully deprive a United States citizen of his civil rights under federal statute. She looked at the second transport aide who had gone very still near the window. Sir, please step outside with my colleague. Charlotte did not move. She stood beside my coffee table with the court order, and the fraudulent clinical summary still spread across its surface, and she looked at Agent Reyes, and then she looked at me, and something happened in her face that I had not seen there in 43 years of being her father. The architecture of it gave way, not dramatically, not all at once. The way a structure gives way when the load-bearing element fails quietly, completely, and without any possibility of reversal. Dad, she said. One word, not a plea, not an accusation. Just the word stripped of everything except its own weight. I looked at my daughter. I did not speak. There was nothing I could have said that would have been honest and also kind, and I had run out of the capacity to be dishonest, so I said nothing, and I turned and I looked out the front window at Clearfield Street in the December morning light. Behind me, I heard the sound of handcuffs, the specific small metallic click of something locking into place that cannot be undone. Agent Reyes appeared at my shoulder. Raymond Holt was taken into custody at his Market Street office 4 minutes ago, she said quietly. And Mr. Pendleton, your son's flight landed at 11:41. He was met at the gate. I kept looking at the window. Outside, the number 23. Bus moved through the intersection at the end of Clearfield Street, unhurried, carrying whoever it was carrying, going wherever it was going, indifferent to the particular. Tuesday, it was a Thursday actually. But it felt like a Tuesday the way certain days feel like the day they most resemble, indifferent to everything happening inside this house that the street could not see. I watched it until it was gone. The last agent out closed the front door behind him, and the house went quiet in the particular way that spaces go quiet after they have held something large and loud and are remembering what they were before. Ebony was still standing near the coffee table. She had not moved during the arrest. She had stood exactly where she was and watched it happen with the stillness of someone who has been waiting a long time for a thing and finds when it finally arrives that she does not quite know what to do with her hands now that they are empty. I walked to the kitchen. I poured 2 glasses of water and brought them back and set one on the table in front of her. She picked it up and drank without speaking. I reached into the inside pocket of my navy jacket and placed a single sheet of paper on the coffee table between us. Not a legal document. A printout her student extern file from Jefferson University Hospital, her name at the top, her enrollment status, her clinical hours completed. Ebony looked at it, then she looked at me. You knew, she said. Since the week after the coffee shop, I said. I needed to understand who I was working with. And you did not use it. Not a question. The statement of someone recalibrating something they thought they understood. You didn't need to be threatened, I said. You had already decided. She was quiet for a moment, her hands wrapped around the water glass the way hands wrap around something when the thing they actually want to hold is not available. There is a fund, I said. I am establishing it next week, medical education scholarships named for Eleanor. You are the first recipient if you want it. No conditions, no obligations, just finish what you started. Ebony looked at the paper, then out the window, then back at me with the expression of someone who has been carrying something heavy alone for long enough that being offered help feels less like relief, and more like something that requires a moment to believe is real. Why? She said. Because you walked into this with nothing but your conscience, I said, and that turned out to be exactly enough. She left 10 minutes later. I stood at the front window and watched her walk down the steps and turn the corner and disappear, and the street received her the way streets receive everyone, without ceremony, without acknowledgement, without any recognition of what she was carrying or what she had just done. 3 weeks later, I knocked on Gloria Marsh's door. She answered in her housecoat with a dish towel over her shoulder, which meant I had caught her in the middle of something which she waved away before I could apologize for it. I handed her a tin of the shortbread cookies she had mentioned once 2 years ago that she could never find at a reasonable price. She looked at the tin and then at me and said, "You look better, Arthur." I told her I was. She said good and went back inside, and I walked to the corner and waited for the number 23. It came at 7:14. I boarded at the front, paid cash, the particular sound of coins dropping into the fare box, clean and final and exactly right, and walked the length of the aisle to the last row. The same molded plastic seat, the same view of Philadelphia sliding past the window, the December streetlights coming on, early the way they do when the days have gotten as short as they are going to get, before they begin slowly and without announcement to lengthen again. The bus was mostly empty. A man near the front with a grocery bag between his knees. A young woman 3 rows up, looking at her phone, with the automatic attention of someone who is not looking at anything. 2 teenagers near the middle sharing earbuds, leaning together, talking about something that made them both laugh in the unguarded way that people laugh when they have forgotten anyone else can hear them. I looked out the window. Philadelphia moved past, in the way it always had, unhurried, continuous, indifferent to any particular passenger and what they were carrying or had set down, or were still learning to carry differently than before. The row houses and the corner stores and the churches and the lit windows of apartments where people were finishing dinner or starting an argument, or sitting quietly in a room that held everything that mattered to them, whether they knew it or not. I was 70 years old. I had no idea what came next. For the first time in a very long time, that felt exactly right. I have lived 70 years on this earth, and this family story taught me something I did not expect to learn at my age, that the people closest to you are not always the safest ones to trust, and that staying quiet when something feels wrong is never the kind of patience that protects you. This was a family betrayal I did not see coming, not because I was naive, because I loved them. And love, when it is not met, honestly becomes the very door that lets harm walk in. I believe God places certain moments in our path not to break us, but to show us what we are still capable of. That Tuesday night on the number 23 bus was one of those moments. If this family story sounds anything like your own, if you have felt that particular silence at a dinner table where something is wrong but no one will say it, do not wait the way I waited. Ask the hard question. Read the documents. Trust what the evidence says, not what you wish it meant. Family betrayal does not announce itself. It arrives with soup with a smile, with the voice of someone who has always known exactly how much you love them. If this family story moved, you leave a comment below and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Thank you for staying until the end. Please note that upcoming stories contain fictional elements created for reflection and life lessons. If that is not for you, we completely understand, and we hope you find content that speaks to your heart elsewhere.